folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Turn this interesting music down a little bit. That is a piece by Maurice Ravel, part of the Mother Goose suite, Ma Mère l'Oie. This is called Little Ugly One, Empress of the Pagodas, which I found quite appropriate for today's topic. And we're going to break with the series that we've been doing. I know you probably, if you've been following the intro to each of the 5 primary souls of creation, you probably have been looking forward to talking about the last one, God. And this is pretty much related. In fact, it's kind of the culmination of that topic that's been bugging me for quite some time. Visions and synchronicities and so forth trying to hit me with their best shot. And last night it all finally came together for me into, okay, this is what was going on with all that weirdness that's been going through my mind in the last few months. So at any rate, we're going to title this one, let me get my, What is a Heavenly Host? How to know when you found one and how to become one yourself. Okay, so this is a term that's used quite often in sermons. I don't know how often it occurs in the Bible, but it's an image that is pretty popular, talking about the heavenly host and what things are going to be like when this life is over. And I'm going to elucidate that. Now, step back a little bit and let's talk about how creation kind of happened, because I think that kind of sets up the whole story pretty well. So let's move over. So let's first talk about this artwork behind me. My prompt to the AI art god was I want you to draw God and the heavenly hostesses baking cookies in heaven, and this is what they happened to give me. Let's see, you can see it all without me in the picture. Here, I usually get 4 images to see what it comes up with, and I thought it was quite interesting that the art AI has a very difficult time drawing God, or perhaps imagining God as anything but a female, which will tell you quite a bit about who's programming the AIs these days. It was interesting to me that it drew 2 pictures with 2 figures, both female, both slightly different versions of the same archetype, wearing the same clothes, blah, 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 same kind of stupid, vapid smiles on their faces. And then it drew 2 with 3 characters, only one of which had a character that looked anything possibly like a male that could be God. And again, with all these vapid smiles on their faces, as one might expect from numby-gumby woke cultists of the youngest generation today. At any rate, interesting art. Not the best job I think it's ever done, but gave me a good laugh. Okay, on to the topic of the day. Let's switch over to this screen. I think we're going to start with how new gods rise, because I think this is a very important piece of this whole thing, and this has been something that's been changing since the beginning of what I refer to as the Gaia experiment, this special system that Earth is a planet within, the latest chosen planet that has been the focus of the most important creative experiments for a long, long time. Okay, so this is basically, I call it the downfall or rising of the gods since day one of creation began. Okay, the biblical creation story starts on a day one. There was a day zero that sort of encompasses the many Big Bang experiments that it took to get to the point where all the technology was ready to begin the Gaia experiment. Okay, creation had to have a lot of infrastructure prepared before it could move on to experiments in social engineering. You got to have a society, you got to have a culture before you can do social engineering. Okay, and day zero of creation was basically about building all that infrastructure. All of the most important laws of physics, the most important pieces of the elementary table, the periodic table, the most important pieces of chemistry were all sorted out during that day zero. And so basically day one of creation began when all the right pieces were assembled to basically gel the star system that we exist in, the Sol star system. There was a lot more going on before that we're not covering here. We're talking mostly about the Gaia experiment because that's the part of creation that most humans are most concerned about. Okay, so at the beginning of this whole plan, everybody knew that this system was God's personal high containment security lab, if you will. This was where God was doing his experiments. And at that point, God exerted quite a bit of power and influence over all the other gods. And they were pretty wary of messing with his experiments. So he pretty much had carte blanche to work on it, along with his lab assistants, some of the gods that decided, you know what, rather than play with my own toys, I want to play with Daddy and his toys. So these were kind of the children that, felt the most attention deficit and wanted to be near the parent, get all the love, get all the attention. And we've seen, if you've ever been in a big family, you know which children those are. Okay, so at this point, all the God level souls knew what God's plan for the Gaia experiment was. Now, some of them were busy conducting their own experiments in their own galaxies and star systems, and were just sort of observers for this whole thing. They knew what God had in mind, and they thought, knock yourself out, Daddy. we can do better than you. So they kind of set themselves up in competition. Or some of them said, well, I know what your overall plan is, but I'm going to focus on this one little piece of it that I want to contribute to, but I want to do it in my own lab, not competing with these other, hangers-on, these attention seekers, bootlickers that are working closely with you, Daddy. I want to have my own lab, but I'm helping you, and I will communicate with you and share my progress, and we'll put our heads together and come up with a better solution than we would separately, or working all in the same lab with Daddy looking over everybody's shoulder. Okay, and those of you who have worked in big corporations, as I have, A lot of my career spent at big corporations like HP, Motorola, United Health, some of the biggest companies in the world. So I know a bit about how things work in large companies. Okay, so this is kind of the setup. At this point, everybody knew generally what was going on with the Gaia experiment, and knew that, okay, this is about building basically two goals. Building a virtual reality system that would be both fun and entertaining and instructional. Coming up with a set of rules for that game that everyone would want to play. Okay, and the souls involved at this point were the ones that had already played the earlier versions of the game, when it was more like the early days of video games, when Pong was the exciting thing and they were throwing atoms at each other, elementary particles at each other, planets at each other, seeing what would happen, and cataloging the results and deciding which interactions were allowed or not allowed and what the probability of them happening would be. This is basically how you invent science. And contrary to what many materialist scientists believe, science was evolved. The laws of physics and chemistry were evolved. They just didn't emerge completely formed from God's or anybody else's head. This is a corollary, a conclusion you can make from accepting that consciousness is fundamental, not matter and energy. Consciousness creates things. Consciousness created all matter, all energy. And we, as quanta of consciousness, are souls doing our own creation exercises, if you will, for whatever time is allotted to us from the time of creation to the time of reassimilation with the Borg. Okay, so everybody knew about the plan at this point. And if you know anything about social engineering, you know that you can't do such a thing if everybody knows what you're trying to do, because they're going to try to influence it. Okay, so basically that's what happened. Some gods became impatient and tried to hurry up the plan. We know what you're going after, God. We know what you want. Let's just get this over with and push, push, push. And if you've ever worked in a large corporation, you know that there is an incredible push from very powerful people who want to get products out. Let's just get this out and move on to the next project. Start making some money. That resulted in problems that were unforeseen, difficulties that actually caused delays, caused customer dissatisfaction. The customers of this plan being basically all of the gods at this point. And so basically some of these gods became sure that this plan would never succeed, and they start working against it, actively saying, hey, you know, our daddy's gone off the rails. If we're going to do anything with creation, we're going to have to do it ourselves. And they started basically breaking up into coalitions and groups who thought they knew better than God. Basically two main ones, though. One group of souls that opposed the Gaia experiment, and one group that generally supported it and were trying at least to be helpful. Both groups were creating new ideas and technology, basically to limit the tech and knowledge of their enemies. It's just something we see basically going on right now in our species. We have a race going in two directions. One is to develop new technologies that give our leaders, our generals, our gods, more power, more influence, more ability to control the outcome of this experiment. And we have another undercurrent of trying to undermine our enemies with psyops. And this is basically what you see going on with cultural Marxism in the West. This has been going on for generations of trying to dumb down Westerners so that fewer will be capable of developing the latest, greatest, wonderful tech, and more of them will be basically acting like brainless ninnies, trying to tear everything down, trying to get in the way, trying to cause problems instead of contribute positively to their team's effort. And so you've got, basically large swaths of different countries, different organizations, actively working against the organization they're part of. This is no more apparent than now, where you've got basically all of Christianity divided over whether to support or to hate Israel. You've got even Israel, the Jews, divided over whether to support or hate the state of Israel. You've got Muslims divided over whether to defend the actions of the Hamas terrorists and rationalize them as being, well, they're just doing it for the faith. And others that are a little bit more rational and saying, you know what, these jerks have been creating trouble in this area for over 100 years. It's time to stop that shit and stop trying to destroy the state of Israel, which is there. 7 million people are there. Are you going to blast them all to kingdom come so you can live happily ever after in your Palestinian paradise, which was never paradise in the first place? At any rate, you see this is all reflected in what's happening today. So that, I hope, is a good example to show you that what I'm talking about makes sense. It's happened before, it's happening again. Okay, so basically what happened at this point is technology was developed to capture enemies in the containment fields of their home worlds. And this is where you get the parts of the Bible that talk about there being giants in the earth. This was a way of, if you went and basically mucked with somebody else's experiments, you could get captured and held hostage, so you wouldn't be able to mess with that again. And this sort of created a pressure to keep competing players from mucking up each other's experiments. You can think of it kind of as the prime directive. Don't mess with another civilization, or you take on some of the karma of it falling, if you will. Those of you who follow Star Trek will know that that was part of the Star Trek mythos, that when they would go to a new world, they would try not to interfere, try not to muck with what was going on there, because that was karmically bad. They didn't ever talk about karma, of course, because, well, it's Hollywood. You can't talk about things like that. Hollywood doesn't like karma. It likes to think that it's above karma. Okay, so capturing enemies in containment fields, major losses are replaced by trained replacements. And this is what gradually created the pressure to give what I call NPC souls, AIs, if you will, the ability to have more latitude in their thinking and grow. And this is what resulted in the pattern of reincarnation. and how it applied to different soul vehicles. So it wasn't just gods directing traffic in their whatever form that they wanted to be showing up in the physical universe, the testing universe, Lucifer's universe, but other lesser souls that had been created sort of as scenery, props, and power tools could actually grow to become conscious enough to become part of the leadership, as the leadership cadre was thinned out by these captures. Okay, then all the old gods eventually got captured or had been infected by reincarnation amnesia, which was basically the secret weapon that God was working on. Why we had to have the Gaia experiment in the first place was because ultimately God's idea was everybody should start the game with reincarnation amnesia, should start each new incarnation basically from a more or less blank slate with only the programming of their incarnation vehicle, which in human standpoint is your DNA, and have to grow up within that programming to awaken your real self, which is your soul. And that way, the idea was that growing up within a different framework of programming would give you, and a different environment culturally, so forth, would give you a different perspective that would allow your soul to learn and grow in ways that they've never been able to learn and grow before. Okay, so, and again, because this whole system is voluntary, God didn't force anybody to play his game. That would have been karmically sinful. So God had to get everybody to sign up. And that's basically what God is good at. God is a good persuader, a good salesman, above all, which a good parent has to be. You got to get your kids to take their medicine. And the best gods do it in a way that the kid doesn't feel that they're being tyrannized, they're being forced to do anything. They do it willingly and gladly to please their parent, to build strong muscles, whatever the story is that you have to make to get the kids to take what you hopefully know is good for them. And unfortunately, parents don't necessarily know for sure what's good for them. And that happened many times with God too. God's not perfect. If you think God was ever perfect or ever will be perfect, you are a fool. You are believing absolute, total bonkers nonsense. This is not how creation works. This is not how souls evolve. I'm sorry. You need to accept that, or you are basically starting from a premise that is completely false and absolutely can be proved to be false. And that's, basically why so many people, once they think about this, even these great theologians and great philosophers, great thinkers, throw up their hand and say, well, God is inscrutable. We can't understand him. Because you won't understand that God is just like you, only has a lot more experience. Okay, so gradually negative spiritual energy builds to a critical energy. Basically because you've got all these trapped spirits who are unhappy. Most people don't like to be bound up inside a mountain, bound up inside the core of a planet, etc., etc. It's not much fun to be sitting there on the sidelines and only able to watch. And when that negative spiritual energy builds to a critical amount, Now, positive energy feeds to it too, but negative energy actually is, if you've ever been around people who are very happy or very sad or very angry, hateful, you know that hate is a much stronger emotion. People will do much more out of hate than they ever will out of love. That's just a fact of energy. That energy builds and reaches a critical point where a Messiah incarnation of God happens. And when that does happen, and that incarnation of God wakes up fully, all the old gods and fully awakened new gods that have been created during this latest round of the experiment, and again, new gods are inside this containment field. This is a lab. We don't want the new gods to get out before we're finished testing what we're testing within the lab. So the new gods get captured basically as soon as they become gods and say, okay, you're in a holding pen here. We can't let you out until God wakes up and tells us this experiment, this phase of the experiment is done. Okay, and then we go to this point where, okay, we repeat the process, okay, until God begins the final Messiah incarnation. Now this is when God wakes up fully and sees the system that's been working has reached the point where, okay, this fulfills the criteria I set up for convergence of this simulation, because it is a simulation. Every reality you experience in the multiverse is a simulated reality. The reality of the soul is the Merkaba. It's a 12-dimensional string. You can think of it as a 12-dimensional string that captures all of the experiences and choices of a soul from its beginning to its end. And that soul can have a new beginning or end when it goes through the same process as God of training a new version. A new version of your Merkaba string gives you a new midpoint of your existence, a new focal point in space-time, in 12-dimensional space-time, from which you emerge in your latest Merkabic incarnation. So all future lives are lived within the context of this new personal string, which has a relationship to other strings that were your forebears, who you have a karmic entanglement with. And of course, every string has a karmic entanglement with God, because God created the first string. Okay, so eventually, as we go through this process, we get to the point where God has an incarnation, fully wakes up and sees, okay, you know what? I like the laws of karma and reincarnation that we've fine-tuned here. One of which, the last one, if you will, the final law that we've been testing, that people have been talking about quite a bit lately, is the Mandela effect. Basically being able to transmigrate souls in the middle of an incarnation, not waiting till they die to send them to the heaven or hell where they need to spend their next incarnation experience. And this is why so many people have been reporting Mandela effect weirdness, remembering something in a very different way than anybody else remembers it, or even whole groups of people remembering something in a different way. That's why they call it the Mandela effect. If you know, Nelson Mandela was a popular leader of South Africa that ended apartheid and started South Africa on its journey to where it is now, under self-rule, without the system of apartheid that kept power in the hands of sort of the European descended elite. I'm not going to go any more into whether that was a good or a bad thing, but basically there are some people that remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison, and others who remember what we accept now as reality, that no, he got out of prison, he led a revolution and set up a new government. He's kind of like the Gandhi of South Africa, if you will. Hardly as noble a soul as Gandhi, but kind of in the same vein of a leader of a successful revolution, if you will. Okay, so that is one of many instances, many famous instances of the Mandela effect. But other people will experience it in other ways. Personally, I've experienced it many times during my awakening, when I would watch a very familiar movie or read a familiar book and discover, wait a minute, I remember it was like this, but now it's like this. Subtle changes. And it's like, weird. I know that didn't happen when I read it before or when I watched it before, but now it's doing this. So I can tell you without a doubt from my personal experience that the Mandela effect is a real thing. At any rate, that's the final thing that we've been testing here. And as you can imagine, that's a big change to be able to send souls to new incarnations in the middle of a current incarnation, and requires a lot of testing. Okay, so basically when it's all said and done, God fully awakens and finds the Gaia experiment tested enough to release. As the Bible says, the trumpets sound and the dead are raised incorruptible to the prime universe, and the best versions are sent as the best versions are sent to their own hell as the worst versions, or maybe to heavens of versions that have, still need more baking, which is kind of where I got this whole cookie paradigm from. Okay, so how does that relate to the heavenly host? Now we're ready to get into the meat of this whole thing. One of the weird things that I've been experiencing in the last 5 years is a very odd sense that I am helping to make the rules, the final rule set that we're going to be operating when this whole thing is finished. And that's been a real, I think that's been the source of maybe the most difficult times I've been through since my awakening about 5 years ago. It's discombobulating because sometimes I will feel like some entities are questioning a certain thing or wanting my input on it, and saying, well, what do you think? And other times I'll be coming up with ideas and I'll feel that those entities are pushing back and saying, no, I don't like that idea. We can't accept that. It's almost like there's there's been a negotiation going on between, what I call senior creators on some very fine points of multiversal law, if you will. And one that's been kind of percolating with some really weird synchronicities is, okay, when this is all done, it's kind of like, God, you're done with your part of creation. The Gaia experiment was your magnum opus. What are you going to do now? How are you going to stay involved in creation but not so involved you become a pain in the ass? And that's been an open point that I've been kind of struggling with in this process of negotiation, to the point where it finally made sense last night. As I've told you many times, and you probably have experienced this witching hour, roughly between 3 and 4 a.m., when you get these weird inspirations, weird dreams that wake you up and give you an idea or something like that, or you've just had a very vivid dream. And if you don't get it down or something, by the time the morning rolls around, you've forgotten all about it, or you can't quite remember it, and you wish, oh gosh, I wish I'd written that down. I don't know, raise your hand if you've ever had that feeling. At any rate, that's a pretty regular occurrence for me, and last night, this is what it was all about. So basically, as I've told you, the completion of this experiment is going to, make it so that really this whole planet, this whole containment lab is not necessary anymore. Now, as I've told you, let's move over this one. Before, the planet we're on is part of a star system, and there were basically many levels of containment during this process of getting down to the smallest experiment that could be undone. But that's what scientists want to do. They don't want to do a big bang when a little bang would tell them what they want to know. At least a responsible scientist would not want to do that. There are some very irresponsible scientists who want to recreate the Big Bang just because they could. And, that's their karma. At any rate, once we have this nested bunch of experiments solved, we've got to unnest it. We've got to do a release to the broader community. And that's what we're going to start now with day 8 of creation. It's going to be unwinding that how things work now within this testing environment, which is Lucifer's physical universe. The new system is already being implemented in other universes because it's already done. It's ready to get out of the lab. And those other universes, if they want to keep operating like they have, to keep in contact with their agents in the physical universe, they have to play by the new rules. Okay, what are the new rules? That's what has been bugging me. And what I'm going to share with you today is how God fits into the new rule picture, the rules that you have to play by if you want to, if you have been a god and you want to be a god again, a god that has any power outside their own universe. If you want to, as a servant of a particular god, have any power within the physical universe, within the area to which the release has happened. Okay, and remember, this release is in a particular Messiah candidate, a particular bloodline, particular people, a particular race, and a particular species on a particular planet. Now, the planet level of this game is pretty easy to spread. We can walk around this planet, we can fly around this planet and spread new diseases, new cures very quickly. And so this new version of reincarnation and karma will spread very quickly on this planet. I say very quickly, and you know, that's kind of in God terms. It could take 1,000 years for it to fully take effect. But in large-scale terms, that's just a blink of an eye. And this is essentially what we're going through with this weird phase we're all experiencing on this planet, is this new set of laws being applied locally in the physical universe. Now, how it works is the following. Let's suppose that you are a former god and you want to play within the new rules. In order to be allowed to have any effect on the area where the new rules apply, you have to go through a process of requalifying as a god. Okay, and this is why you've seen some higher powers trying to interfere in what's going on with humanity right now, and taking some actions, being observed, having crashes or whatever, and then, you know, you won't hear from that species again. They seem to have been driven away. Well, this is what's happening. You've got to sign up to the new rules, and that has karmic consequences. And many of your agents are going to get captured or killed. It's a spiritual battle, and it's being fought at many, many levels. Now, what happens when you come into the sphere of this new set of laws? You are subject to the new laws of reincarnation and karma. I'm not going to go into all of those laws, but just the ones that govern what happens to gods and those who would be gods, those who want to advance beyond the 8th level of consciousness. Remember, when I talk about the Merkaba, I say there are 4 levels of physical consciousness that represent your experiences within the physical universe, Lucifer's universe, the testing universe. And some souls reincarnate over and over and over again in that universe, basically as non-player characters, and they exist forever playing kind of this matrix game of playing, you know, basically session after session of Lucifer's physical universe game. Those who develop spiritual awareness will get a slightly different game where they play the Lucifer game in this universe, and then after they die, they go to an afterlife. One of many afterlives that are run by gods who have earned their own universe of creation and who are recruiting souls to come and play their game in the afterlife. And this is how reincarnation works, is basically a soul moving back and forth between those two universes in incarnation forms as they develop their own Merkaba. Your own personal Merkaba is effectively, as I said, your memories and experiences from all of your incarnations, both physical and spiritual. And that is what forms the nucleus of your own universe, which you won't become aware of until you develop enough experience to reach the God level of consciousness. Now, when you reach this God level of consciousness, how does that happen, that you make this massive transition from thinking that you're reincarnating over and over and over again and having an afterlife experience, incarnation experience, afterlife, this does seem like an endless cycle. And that's where, Buddhists and some Hindu sects get this idea, well, I've got to get off this wheel. It's no fun doing this. Not realizing that there's a reward at the end. It's not for nothing that you reincarnate and you deal with karma. It's because if you do a good job of it, you eventually will reach a God level of consciousness, for better or worse, because some gods are dark gods. They are the ones who didn't bake good cookies. And this is where we talk about the heavenly host. God has his own private universe like everybody else. He has his own Merkaba. This is God's testing ground, if you will. And God's playing a very focused game. He's not messing with every single soul that comes into existence. That's Lucifer's job and all of these lesser gods who run spiritual universes of their own. God has a very special place where he only wants to deal with the kids that really deserve his attention. Okay? He's not gonna taste every cookie as it's baking and say, oh, this is perfect, I love it. He's going to take the ones who have graduated and whose mentors say, hey, I think this cookie is ready to be a god. What do you think? Now, how does that happen? Well, God's universe is structured in kind of a strange way, and you're going to have to bear with me. It might be a little bit jarring for you, but it has to do with why sex exists and how it's become so important to the development of the multiverse. Now, as you are probably aware, God identifies very strongly as male. God is the most masculine male, committed male you'll ever find. Sorry, he's not gay. Never will be gay. Wouldn't touch another guy's tallywhacker to save his life. Deal with it. God's heaven is an interesting place. It's basically set up the way God wants it to be, as a community. Now, the interesting thing about this community is God has a very specific idea how his perfect world would be. And it's his way. And if you don't like it, you don't have to play that game, but this is the only way you're going to get to be a god. God's place is, I might describe it as a combination of, the white bread world of suburban America, of the Leave It to Beaver generation. This era where everybody who had a job could feed a family of 4. The moms could stay at home with the kids. And it was a pretty healthy society on the whole, not perfect. Now, another model of society that God was quite fond of when he experienced it was that of the Sultan's harem, if you will, the Sultan's palace. And there's an aspect of that in God's heaven. So here's basically what needs to happen if you want to be a god. After having had the experience of being female, yes, God has been female. God has been incarnated in every species you can possibly imagine. From weird-looking jellyfish things to insects to whatever. And one of the lessons that God has learned is that you're not going to understand what it's like to be God until you've had to endure being all the things God is not. Especially the most important thing, being a female. And in fact, the way it works is that if you want to become a god, you want to have control of your own universe, there's only 2 ways to do it. One is by having become one of God's companions. This is the Gemini pattern, the twins. If in your travels, in your journeys, you're some other guy that God has found in his lifetime, any of his lifetimes, that was like, man, this is like one of my best buddies. I wouldn't mind having this guy living next door to me. Okay? Those are the guys that get to be gods. If you're not one of those guys, if you haven't been fortunate enough to be one of God's companions in any of his incarnations, those of you who know something about the life of Alexander the Great, that's a good illustration of what this companions thing is all about. His special unit of horsemen, which were the best soldiers in the whole army, the ones that won all the battles with their well-timed cavalry charges, those were called his companions. And they were made up of basically guys about his age that Alexander liked to spend time with when he was having some leisure time. They were his drinking buddies. The ones who enjoyed talking about philosophy and talking over, things that Alexander had learned from his teacher, Aristotle. Kind of a strange bunch of cats. And if you didn't fit into that group, and also were a great soldier, well, you didn't get to be one of Alexander's companions. God's companions work the same way. And this is essentially something that has evolved from free will, because part of every new system has to please, it has to be a compromise between the souls that are involved. If a solution is forced on souls against their will, that's karmically sinful. That's not going to work. That's a failure. Okay, so God's win in the way things are going to work from now on, which God is going to be a lot less active than in the past. You're not going to see Zeus running around wielding thunderbolts and playing favorites. It's not happening anymore. Hasn't happened for a long time, in fact. What does happen is, if you want to be a god, You either need to have been or become one of God's companions, male companions, basically filling the Gemini pattern, or this is God's win because he gets to have all his buddies around him in his heaven. That's his choice. What's the other way to do it, which is basically what the other gods who were involved in this, the other senior creators involved in this decision came up with, is okay, the other way to get it, become a god, is to basically earn a spot in God's heaven as a female. How do you do that? Well, this is where we have to talk a little bit about where the idea of nuns came from. The brides of Christ that were basically a very important part of the Catholic Church who devoted themselves to the Messiah. This is how you get to be a god, is by becoming a bride of Christ. Now, that's how you get to this highest heaven. The truth is that you don't necessarily have to be the bride of God. You could hook up with any of his companions instead and set up your own little household in this Leave It to Beaver utopian community. Many of the aspirants wanting to be goddesses or gods will come there, and they have a third option. They don't necessarily have to do the dirty with God or one of God's companions. They can go there and have an incarnation of service. Do some useful service within this utopian community of God's heaven for the period of one incarnation. They're the trash guy, the mailman, the milkman, whatever. All of the basically NPC characters in God's universe, God's spiritual universe, are basically having one last incarnation before they get to be gods. And they have to earn that through service in other universes. Okay? So, if you're a female and you want to be a goddess, you got to come be a bride of Christ or a bride of one of the companions. Or you have to develop some passion that earns you godhood through service, through providing something useful to the multiverse. A great idea, great art, be a great healer, whatever. God likes to have his universe run like sort of his version of a perfect world. And this is maybe one of the places where folks come up with this idea of a new earth. God's earth is kind of a parallel of this earth, Lucifer's earth, but a very utopian one that has certain rules that basically are set up the way God likes them. It's a universe of service to God. And it's evolved. It's not like it was last time God woke up. It's been remodeled to suit the latest version of God, who, as I've told you, incarnated in 1959 and has fully woken up, looked at what's developed around him and said, aha, I see. that humanity has done exactly what they needed to do as the final species, the final chosen species. They developed AI, they developed virtual realities. They're basically proving that God's plan was their plan, coming up with the same ideas and solutions, utopian solutions, and just not fully developing them like God did. Okay, so a lot of what humanity is doing is Me Too kind of shit. Non-player character stuff. But it's proving the whole idea, the general idea that God has, works, and filling in all the details. God is not a micromanager. God doesn't control every knob in the universe. This is nonsense. If you think God is like that, you are stupid. Nobody would want to spend eternity twisting all the knobs in a universe trying to make it perfect. That's what Borg tries to do. That's the adversary's task. That's why the adversary always loses. Hive minds always lose because they want to control everything. And when they get overwhelmed with all the things they can't control, that's when they lose the boss battles to God's team. It's designed that way. There are souls that are going to be losers. It's nobody's fault but their own. They're given the same chance to develop and grow as every other soul. Every new non-player soul that's created has the opportunity to learn and grow and develop higher consciousness. And if they play the game well, they could develop and grow their string to be as extensive as God's string. No beginning, no end, just a new midpoint. That's the promise of the Messiah. Everybody has a chance, but you got to play the game. And the game is judged by karma. It's very fair. It's very well tested. And it's ready to unleash on the next layer of testing. Okay, we've done the testing in this little lab of planet Earth and human species and human messiahs. Now we've got to roll it out to the next layer. The rest of this star system. We're part of actually a star cluster, the Sirius cluster. And the Syrians need karma in the worst way. They become a very dark bunch who don't like what's going on this planet and have been playing for the adversary. It's a serious problem. Okay, so here's the deal. If you want to be God level, you got to play this game. Every time you want to go up another level after that, because there's 4 God levels of consciousness, you've got to go play the game again to get up to the next level. So you've got to go through this process and basically have been tested and baked in God's kitchen 4 times before you get to full 12-dimensional awareness, full control of your universe, and the ability to be part of the highest heaven. I'm not talking about God's personal heaven. The highest heaven is where the senior creators meet. This is that place of pure thought that existed before time and space, before any universes. And that is where all these experiments are planned and monitored. And there are still a lot of souls up there who've been kind of watching and helping with the planning and putting in their vote on what goes and what doesn't go. And those few holdouts that haven't been playing the game are now faced with a quandary, because this latest group of laws that are being released don't allow them to sit on the fence anymore. Okay, the system is working, and there's going to be no modifying it till God comes back to this highest heaven and says, okay, let's work on the next plan. You can't do it without the leader. So you've got a lot of couch potato souls who've never played this game, and they've been watching it and resisting the temptation to get involved. They're going to get involved. That's essentially why we had to go through so much pain and suffering, to basically make those holdout souls who thought that they could remain senior creators forever and just sit back and I'm more of an idea man. Sit back there forever and not have any skin in the game. Well, let me tell you, God's got plenty of skin in the game, and so do most of his senior children. And they are sick to death of these, well, I'm not going to use a bad word about them, but there's basically a bunch of freeloaders in that highest heaven who don't deserve their titles. They're not as smart as they think they are. They haven't learned crap from watching this reality show, because you don't learn by watching. Okay? You can't go through eternity playing Forrest Gump. Or, what's the character? Chauncey, and being there. I like to watch. Doesn't work like that. You gotta have skin in the game. And so these holdouts are the ones that have been basically forcing us to generate so much energy, so much negative energy, to get this experiment to converge. And finally, we've attracted all of them into play. The ones, maybe there's a few holdouts, but they have no power. They're basically duds. They may be old gods, but they have no power anymore. All of the power, all of the functionality of this creation engine is in those who have skin in the game. And it doesn't matter if you're the oldest god in the world, if you're God himself, or you're one of the newest ones, an Einstein or something like that, or Mozart. Your godhood is just as valid and just as important as any other. It fits a very important piece of a greater whole. And that's the promise held out for everyone, but you got to earn it. You got to be part of the heavenly host. You got to learn to be a hostess before you can host your own universe. And that's how it works. There's 3 ways to be a host. You can be lucky enough to be one of God's companions. You can come and try to get the attention of God or one of his companions and have a child. This is the key. You got to pair up. If you want to go the easiest route to becoming a god, you've got to basically do it with your feminine wiles. You got to go pair up with God or one of his associates, Now, the key is that if you pair up with one of his companions, that'll get you through the first 3 levels of godhood. To get to the highest level, though, you've got to shack up with God himself in his universe. Sorry, I didn't make up the rules. It's just what happened to be a popular and approved solution. The highest level, the senior creator level, you've got to be able to go mano a mano with God on every level, and that's how you get to be God's consort for long enough to have a child in this personal heaven of God. This is basically relates to, I've talked before about the Scheherazade pattern. If you know anything about Scheherazade, the 1001 Arabian Nights, you'll know that basically there was this great sultan who decided, for whatever reason, that he was going to sleep with a woman for one night and then have her killed. Because he believed that women were, I guess, too much trouble, and he would never find one that would meet his requirements as a mate. Kind of a weird, dark story. And as it turned out, there were fewer and fewer volunteers for this great honor once it was realized that, sleeping with the Sultan was going to get you killed. There were fewer volunteers and fewer young women not being hid by their families, so they wouldn't be pulled to the palace and added to the Sultan's harem. Till one day, the daughter of the Grand Vizier, the highest official, you might consider that kind of the Lucifer of this story. She decided to volunteer and said, well, we can't find anybody for tonight, so I'll volunteer, Daddy, because if he can't find a woman for the night, he's probably going to kill you next, and I love you so much, I can't let him do that. So she goes, and this is a lady named Scheherazade, and she starts telling this Sultan stories, and has a knack for stories, and a very winning way with her, and actually keeps him entertained for 1,000 nights. Always kind of leave him hanging on the edge with the story. Hey there, Mikhail. Here's my little Messiah candidate. And after 1,000 nights, the 1,001st night, the Sultan decides, you know what? I was stupid. You're the one that I want to have forever and make children with. And so he marries Scheherazade, and they live happily ever after. At any rate, this is a very important model that was set up quite a while ago, that I've been struggling with, having been brought up in kind of a very monogamous society. It was tough for me to get the idea that God didn't work that way. But in fact, that's how heaven works. You've got to shack up as a woman in heaven, or do service in God's heaven to get to the God level. To get to the highest level, I'm sorry, you've got to shack up with God himself. Or become one of the companions that basically the companions are welcome to stay in heaven until they want to go have their own party separately from God. So the companions are another special class. That's another way to get to have your own heaven. Once you become one of God's companions, assuming that you can get through the next levels, which means you've got to go reincarnate again, and you've got to go prove yourself again, just like God did. If you can stay one of God's companions through all levels of developing your own godhood, then you can get there without having had to become female and have a relationship, have a child with God. Now, here's another piece of what's going on in all this, and what drove this is there's another concept in the Bible that's pretty universal, talking about children of God. What does it mean to be a child of God? Okay, now many people would say, well, I'm a child of God because I say I am. That's not the way it works. Being a child of God means exactly that, being a child of God. How could you do that? Well, you could be born of the union of God and another woman when God was incarnated in the physical universe, or when God was spending time in any of the other universes, because God's been through it all. God's been Muslim, God's been Christian, God's been atheist, God's been, you name it. God has experienced it and gone through pretty much all the states of self-delusion that you could possibly imagine. Okay, so there's kids all over the place that are children of God. But now that this Gaia experiment is finished, God doesn't particularly want to come back and play this game again. Doesn't have to, until such time as, like before, the kids all gather together and say, please God, please come and help us. We can't get past this boss battle without you. And that happens in every day of creation at least once, that God will get called in, come in, and okay, I'll help you out once more, and goes through a lot of pain and suffering, and we repeat this pattern at a larger level. Okay, that's what it's going to take to basically finish creation. We've got to, now that we've got this great version of reincarnation and karma, we've got to continue testing it and honing it and moving out, expanding it to take over basically Lucifer's universe. At that point, when there are no adversaries, there are no hive minds left in Lucifer's universe, all of those souls that like to live in a hive mind and like to have somebody tell them what to do, when to do it, and not take any responsibility for their existence, their actions, that is essentially when Lucifer wins his game. And he gets to retire, rather like God is about to retire and run his universe like he wants. Maybe take some liberties with the laws of physics and chemistry that he was not allowed to, he didn't allow himself to do. Lucifer's got a hell of a lot of self-control. Amazing character. I didn't get to spend much time with him when I met him, but wow. Hats off to you. At any rate, this is how things work now. This is the pattern that must be followed if you want to become a god. Not every soul is going to want to become a god. You don't have to. You may be perfectly happy living out eternity as the servant of another god in some other spiritual universe. Knock yourself out. If you want to move beyond that, this God of whatever universe that you currently worship in is not going to be able to just give you a referral and send you to your own universe and let you be your own God. You got to go through the old man and this interesting set of rules that God's universe operates by. That's just the way it is. It's built into the patterns of our history. It's built into the patterns of our species programming, the soul vehicle called humanity. It's going to work. It's going to work well. And it's going to keep a lot of riffraff from gaining powers that they don't deserve, as has happened very, very often. We're not going to have these mother-loving love goddesses who break hearts, who turn their ex-lovers into constellations and let them chill their heels in the sky ever after. That's not going to cut it. Okay, those gods will be out there, and you're welcome to worship them. You're welcome to go live in their heaven if you choose, but you're not going to get beyond being their servant. Sorry. That's the way it is. Now you can tell me I'm full of crap, I don't know anything. Well, you'll find out. Okay? You just wait and see when you die what happens. If it's going to be like you think it is based on your religious beliefs, well, you can laugh and cackle all you want, say, Rob, you're full of shit. I'm just telling you like it is, based upon my experience, what I've learned, what I know. And I think we'll just end it there. Hope you weren't too surprised or shocked by today's episode. Maybe one of the ones that'll lose me more subscribers than any other, but that's the way it is. I'm not here to please anybody. I'm here to tell you what I know is the truth. At any rate, like, share, subscribe. If you found this particularly interesting, tell a friend. Hell, contact me. If you want to talk over some fine points, if you want to riff on a subject, I'm very open to constructive feedback. I'm pretty well sick of NPCs calling me crazy, telling me, oh, what drugs are you on, man? If you're one of that variety of soul, you know, I don't have any use for you. And I can tell you, God doesn't have any use for you either. Doesn't work that way. At any rate, till next time, this is the Honest Hour with Rob Trump. Happy Karma.